I've had clients like that. I had a graphic designer who was doing lots of posts on how do you design your own logo and so on. And then we thought, hang on a second, you don't want to teach people how to design their own logo because you want them to pay you to work. If you're attracting people who want to do it themselves, who aren't going to pay, and they just want to sort of hodgepodge something together in Canva, that's obviously not the kind of client that you want for your high-end professional design services.
You're listening to Podcasting for Experts, with honest conversations about using podcasting as a tool to grow your reach, increase your audience, make a positive impact on the world, and most importantly, to get paid for your efforts. I'm your host, Jess, and we are Pristine Podcasts. Let's talk podcasting. Hey everyone, and welcome back. In this episode of Podcasting for Experts, we are talking to Anna Lundberg. Anna Lundberg is the founder of One Step Outside and the host of the Reimagining Success podcast. She helps experienced professionals around the world design a career, a business, and a lifestyle that brings them more freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment outside of the conventional 9-to-5. And in today's episode, we are talking about a topic that is very important for the success of your business, and that is your content. But before we're getting into the nitty-gritty of what good content for your business looks like, we're going to start with the big picture. Anna shares her strategy for defining the successful outcomes for your content. She emphasizes the importance of a sustainable business model and what that actually looks like in practice, creating content in a way that is sustainable for you personally, despite what everyone else wants you to do. And then we discuss the strategies that you might end up using to make sure that your content actually attracts paying customers to you. How do you weed out the wrong customers who are really not aligned with you through your content and the power of your message being super specific? And so many other things, of course. I really hope that you enjoy the interview. Hello, Anna. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast. And I was asking the other day, I was looking for experts for season 3 because we're talking all about all of the different methods that we can use to market the podcast to get more people to listen to our shows. And that's where I really wanted to have a chat with you, because making content is one thing, but making content that is going to benefit our businesses at the end of the day has turned out to be something quite different in my eyes, because sometimes we get so carried away making content, but it doesn't do anything for us at the end of the day. So thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing all of your wisdom. And yeah, I'm super excited.
Oh, thank you, Jessica. Thanks for having me. Yeah, and it's such an important topic. It's funny, years ago, I always heard that kind of content is king talk, within the corporate world that I came from. And I think, as you say, it's taken some time to realize it's not just about creating a lot of content. You really need to put a bit more thought into it and make sure it's working hard for you. Otherwise, there's so much content out there in every form, audio, video, written, pictures, that you just drown in that, don't you? So you're working so hard to create content, but it's not actually getting you any closer. So yeah, really excited to be here with you and hopefully share something of value for your audience.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a really good point. Like, talking about anything and everything isn't going to work. So I've been doing kind of marketing and tech for a long time. So I get to see all of the blog posts on people's websites that have been turned into draft at some point. And it is surprising, like, how much content I've seen people create that at the end of the day have absolutely no value to their business. I've done it as well. Like, I had piles and piles of blog posts that I used to write when I was first starting out. And I was like, why the heck was I talking about this? Like, this doesn't even help anyone.
I've just done the same work. I started, 5-6 years ago, and I've been working with both an SEO agency and a web design agency, going through my blog posts, and I'm so embarrassed to see what I wrote at the beginning. But, that's part of the journey. And it's, at the time, I thought I was doing something pretty smart, or at least it was fun to start with. But of course, we learn, and it's never going to be perfect from the start. So that's the other thing to say, right? We shouldn't judge ourselves and be too critical, because we have to start somewhere. But it's definitely a learning process.
Yeah, that was a hard learning to look at. I was just like, let me hide this and let me hide this and this. I was like, okay, half of the stuff gone. So how do we get started to look at this from the big picture? So I know that pretty much everyone that is interested in this topic is already doing the podcast. So putting out the podcast episodes every single week for most of our clients anyways is something that's become a consistent habit. But how do we take a step back to be sure that the content that we're actually creating for the podcast is going to line up with where we want to take the business?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is that you're already so far ahead of most people, right? The fact that you have the podcast. And I think you were saying, a large or part of your audience has a business, and the podcast is a big part then of the marketing strategy. And I work with clients in the early stages of their business, and a lot of them have on their wish list and they're beginning to start a podcast, but it's a huge undertaking. It's requiring a lot of courage and inspiration and content and all the tech and so on. So the first thing to say is it's amazing that you already have this. And as you said, if you're consistently creating content, you're already way ahead of the game versus most other people, right? I guess just to share briefly where I come from this topic, I mentioned there my corporate background. I worked at Procter & Gamble, so big American multinational company. And at the time, I was in digital marketing, and it sounds crazy, but it was quite new at the time. And we were working on content strategies from that corporate perspective. And we worked with, Google and media agencies and YouTube and Facebook and so on. So I was always really passionate about that. And then, as we briefly said there, it's a very different thing to create content for yourself, for your own business and so on. So I left there in 2013. And then I've been gradually learning, very, very steep learning curve for myself, and of course helping clients. And I actually started with the blog post, as we said, because I'm more of a writer, funnily enough. So I started just almost travel blog initially, that then developed into kind of a career work blog, and then ultimately became the professional platform. I launched my podcast in December 2018, I think. So yeah, it's 3 years now, which is again an amazing sort of library of content, but it's definitely evolved over time. But to answer your question, it has to start with, what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? And as we said, whether this is, the podcast is your business in itself in a way, or a side hustle or a fun hobby that you're doing, of course, that's then different to, is the podcast seeking to drive traffic to your Facebook group, your programs, to actually generate income for you. And those are different objectives. But also the big picture, I always ask the question, what does success look like for you?
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get carried away with, I want to be, and I do see people celebrate, and that's great. I've got 100,000 million downloads and I'm top 10, whatever that is, that's amazing. But is that important? I'm going to hold my hand up here. I'm not top 10 entrepreneurship podcast yet. I get the listing and I do really well in some random countries in the world. And, I have a loyal following that's steadily growing. Likewise, my Instagram following, Facebook and so on, it's not that kind of, 300,000 people. And yet I still have a viable business. So I think it's important not to get caught up in the metrics of thinking you have to have these numbers and hustling away to achieve some superficial definition of success. Whereas actually, for me, what I want to do is I want to, have a resource that's useful for my existing clients. Actually, I often share podcast episodes for them. I want to obviously attract new clients. I want to use it to educate and so on, right? So really asking yourself, why are you doing this podcast? Why are you creating each piece of content as well? And what does success look like for you in specifically regard to the podcast, but also more broadly in your business?
I think that's a super important question. I don't know if it's 2 episodes ago. Actually, no, I think we'll be further out by that point. Maybe 5 or 6 episodes ago. I can't remember which one. But I just recorded an entire episode around numbers, because I've noticed this obsession of, I need to get to X number of downloads, or I need to do it this way or achieve that thing. And realistically, I was talking about that chasing the numbers without any point to the business doesn't really help anyone, and it doesn't necessarily get you any kind of results. Like, the things that matter is that you're getting closer to the goals that you want to achieve, and that the podcast plays its part on that journey, and not so much doing it for the sake of getting X number of downloads. It's like you said, a podcast can be an amazing resource for existing clients to get people to the place where they can become your future clients. Like, that was one of the things that I wanted to do, because I was like, there are so many people who could be starting out with their podcast, but they're not, because they don't have the skills and the resources that they need. So I'm like, well, I can provide that. And this is a great platform to do it in. And if I can help people with that, then it's doing the thing that it's supposed to be doing. And if that's 100 people listening to it and taking action, or 10,000 people listening to it, but just 100 people taking action, it's still only 100 people who've done something with it.
So just getting arbitrary downloads without people taking any action on it is not going to help me, it's not going to help them, and it's not going to help the business. So I think what you're saying there is super important to define what you want to get out of it and what success in quotation marks, because, what that actually looks like for yourself and defining that very clearly.
Yeah, and a couple of things there. Of course, having the big numbers, you could have, first of all, fake followers on Instagram, etc., right? You could have paid for them, which a lot of, unfortunately, unethical companies do and so on. And actually, that's no good, because people who are never going to buy from you, it's unethical, it hurts you in the algorithm, etc., right? So having a load of people and all those downloads, but actually, as you say, they're not your ideal clients, they're never going to buy from you, that's pointless. And you also said something interesting, which is you want to help people, you want to make an impact. And I think, of course, we have financial goals, and if this is our main income, we need to be earning a living. But most of us started the business because we have some more altruistic purpose, right? We want to help people with a particular problem and we have a solution for them. So that's also success. It's, as you said, if you're helping one person, 10 people, 100 people, that's incredible that you're already having that impact. So of course, most of us, maybe many of us, dream of helping thousands and whatever in the future, but let's focus also on celebrating and really recognizing and showing gratitude for the people who are now listening to us and spending their precious time and potentially also money with us as well.
And I don't think it takes thousands of people. Like, I was just sharing that the other day, I just had someone reach out to us who was like, I found you on YouTube. And I'm like, oh, that's great. We have 26 subscribers. Thanks. It's completely irrelevant how big the number is, because it was just the right person coming across your things at the right time. And I think that helped a lot. It was very relevant what she was listening to, and it was precisely addressing the problem that she was facing. And, she's come to work with us. So that's job done, right? So that's one thing that proves that putting the stuff out there is getting me the result that I want to get. And that's what I'm interested in. So how do we figure out, okay, so we know what our objectives are. You're like, okay, I have that defined. I know what I'm trying to get out of it. How do we bring this back to the content that we're actually creating, and how do we make sure that we leverage that content properly to bring us closer to those objectives?
So there's another step in between, again, and apologies for not getting straight into the nitty-gritty of the content, but we have what is success and what are your objectives, but then you mentioned there the numbers. What is the business model that's going to support that objective, right? We can't go straight from the big picture to, let's create content. Again, we need to be thinking about that. And as you said, actually, unfortunately, we tend to compare ourselves to, I don't know about you, but it's very tempting to compare ourselves to these big name people like coaches and business, whatever, who have the millions. And of course, they've been going for 10, 15, 20 years. And there are all those memes, which are very true. You see the iceberg of success. You only see them now when they've popped their heads up. I recently read Dory Clark's book, The Long Game. She's a personal brand expert, and she shared, and I wasn't aware of that, for 5 years, she was desperately trying to get a book published. She was rejected and her agent, dumped her in the end. She finally got articles published. She published, 200, 500 articles. And ultimately only then did she get picked up via one particular article she read, etc. And then since then, her rise has been kind of, I was going to say catastrophic. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. What am I saying? The sort of exponential, I guess. So, there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes that you don't see. And we the classic thing is that we compare our day one to someone else's, year 10 or whatever. So that's really dangerous. But importantly, in terms of numbers, as you said, you could have 25 followers and you can have 5 paying clients. When I started, I had no followers and I still got clients wanting to work with me. And that's why it's so important to design your business model so that it works for your objectives, and then so it's going to support you financially with the numbers you have. And most of us don't have the thousands of thousands, and certainly not when we're starting out, that's going to justify having a course that costs, $20, or a membership program that's like, we're going to need millions and millions of customers in order for that to be viable. So we need to be choosing clients who have an urgent problem that we can solve, that value our solution, that are able and willing to pay.
That part's important. Able and willing to pay.
Do you know, I went, and thank you for sort of following up on that, because I brushed over it quickly, but it's something that happens again and again with clients. And within my coaching training, so many people had these really altruistic, maybe naive ideas. And me too, I want to help struggling entrepreneurs. By definition, they don't have money, unfortunately, right? Or I want to help, single mums who are unemployed. That's a very challenging target to have. And it's not to say that we shouldn't be doing that. And I think it's the wrong thing to give up on that and then just start working with 8-figure entrepreneurs who are rich and whatever, right?
I think it just takes
I say
a different...
wrong, that's a bit judgy, but I mean...
Yeah, no, but it's a different business
choice.
model, right? Like I might be able to help those people, but then I'm going to have someone who needs to provide the money. So maybe there is a big corporate foundation where I can do that in the form of a not-for-profit setup where other people can provide the money to then help that group of people. So it's not to say that you shouldn't work with that group of people, but it's the able to. So it's not like the single moms who are unemployed wouldn't want to pay. It is a question, are they able to pay? And is it the right thing for them, like right in that moment? And that's where I totally agree with the fact that the container just might need to be different. And therefore your approach would be different because you're now needing to focus on a different group of people to provide the potential funding for what you're wanting to do. So it's still an amazing thing, but it's just the way we sometimes approach it. It's not going to bring us the result.
Exactly that. And as you said, it's the business model. It could be that you have a portfolio career, whereas this is my passion. They can't afford it, so I'm going to do it pro bono, volunteering, or very cheap rate. And that's, my contribution, my impact that I want to make. And as you said, maybe I take corporate clients or something else to earn money. Or another approach, of course, is, and an important one, is to have tiers of programs, right? I have so much free content. And by the way, the podcast for most of us is free, right? So podcasts, free Facebook group, years worth of blog posts, videos, PDFs, resources. I do free workshops. So I'd like to think that I'm giving my heart and soul to people who can't afford to work with me. And let's face it, 95% or whatever of people who follow me will never pay me. They have so much content that I'm giving my all to really help them as much as possible. However, I'm running a business and not a charity. And so I also then have tiers. People can work in a group program, they can work one-to-one and so on. But all this to say that your business model ultimately has to work for you. And let's say with coaching, often starting with individual sort of higher end programs is going to help you get the money you need in order to be able to then grow and so on longer term. But that's the first thing. So who are your clients, designing your packages, your pricing. And then ultimately, when we come to content, is that the marketing and sales and so on has to work for you and your business model too. I see so many, and funnily enough, I was doing a training on this a while ago and I was scrolling through my Facebook and all the ads, and obviously it's because I'm kind of in this space, but they're all like, webinars are dead, you've got to do workshops, or workshops are dead, you've got to do webinars, or this is the perfect webinar formula and you must do a membership. No, memberships don't work. It's literally 300 messages all conflicting about what kind of program I should or shouldn't do, the course or not the course, membership, one-to-one, how I should be advertising, how I should be marketing, how I should be selling. And ultimately, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. It probably has worked for them and maybe it works for many of their clients, but it might not work for you because you have a different business model, you have a different client base, you have a different lifestyle that you're trying to support, and you have different personality and preferences and so on. So if you're, let's say, simple comparison, but if you're an introvert who prefers to sit behind a computer and kind of write blog posts and work individually with people really deeply, probably you don't want to be going out and doing like a 5-day live Facebook challenge where you're having to have all this energy up. It's going to drain you. You're never going to want to do it and you probably won't get clients out of it. Likewise, if you're a really bubbly, extroverted person who loves that kind of thing, who would never have the discipline to sit down and write stuff and so on, then probably the kind of live, spontaneous thing is better for you and so on, right? Really sort of simplistic way of comparing, but it's so important for you to ask yourself, what does your personality and your preferences lend themselves to? And obviously podcasting, by definition, we have a certain style of doing that, but even then some are more introverted, some might have the video turned on, others just doing audio. Obviously you might be turning that into blog posts and social media posts and so on, but it's always thinking, what kind of content do you want to be creating that serves you as well as your clients, and that you're going to be able to stick to that consistent schedule? Because if you're trying to adopt some guru's kind of perfect formula, that just doesn't sit with you at all, it feels sleazy, it doesn't feel authentic, you're never going to stick to it, it's never going to work for you.
It's just
and
so
you're just
draining.
Wasting time and money. So draining.
It's been like 6 years now that I haven't had a job. So if I think of all the things that everyone else has told me, like, oh, you have to do it this way. And I joined groups and I was in a mastermind and they're like, oh, well, you can't be a service provider and make money.
Oh, wow.
Like you have to be selling a product, you have to go funnels. And I'm like, to be honest, I find this annoying and I kind of disagree with all of the stuff. And how good are you going to be at showing up? Like you said, if you hate, being, I don't know, live talking to people, it's going to drain you. You're not going to show up. You're going to put it off. You're going to get sick. You know, all the things that happen just perfectly in time for you having to do your launch. The stress level goes through the roof, and then people just get sick halfway through. They, you know, have to drop out because they just can't do it. And it's not healthy for yourself to be, a little bit stressed, a little bit of push, a little bit of new, a little bit of challenge. It's important to develop. But if you are always in a state of like, oh my God, I have this next thing coming up and I'm stressed out about this and I have to do that and I feel so uncomfortable, that's not going to support you in the long term. You're actually just going to end up not doing it. And that does more harm than it does any good.
Exactly that. And I think, as you say, you need to ask yourself, is this just a little bit of discomfort because, I've never done video, so I need to practice a bit. So for me, 5-6 years ago, and I still have the awful videos that I did, not to say that my videos are amazing now, but obviously now I turn the camera on and I can speak and I know my content so well and I've done it so many times. But when I did it 5-6 years ago, so bad, you know, whether it's the tech stuff, the lighting or whatever, of course that's a part of it, but really I was just popping on to just awful stuff that I was putting out. But again, it's a learning curve. But for me, I knew, because I've done acting before and I'm relatively extrovert and I enjoy talking, and evidently it has worked. And again, if you're podcasting, probably you do have that kind of natural tendency to be able to tell stories and so on. But for me, I knew that it was something I could get over. Whereas if it's something that, oh my gosh, there's just no way I would ever do that, it doesn't sit well with me, I hate it, then don't force yourself, as you said, because it will just drain you. You're not going to stick to it and it's not going to support your objectives. You'll succeed in building a business on a method that you don't enjoy at all, and it's not going to be a good thing for you or for your clients. So 100%, there is no right answer, right? It's about finding what's right for you.
And then being okay to change it, because what's okay in this season might not work in the next one. Like the amount of people who are like, oh, I used to love doing this and now I feel like I'm just not that in love with it anymore. Okay, change it. Like no one's going to be offended. Like if I do this podcast and I do it for 6 seasons and then I'm like, you know what? I feel like I'm just like waffling now every week because I've talked about all the things that there is to say and I'm happy. Like I packaged it up in seasons because I'm like, I want this topic first and then this one and then this one. And then I know what the next 3 are going to be. And if I feel like this is now a complete product in itself, I will just very happily leave it and I'll do another one and I'll talk about something else. I'm not afraid to say, okay, this has run its course now and I don't love it as much as I used to, or I feel like I've said it all, or I don't want to do it as often as I did. Like you are allowed to change your plans or to change the way you're doing things. You know, you don't have to be married to it forever.
And that's it. And it's sort of knowing how to balance doing it for long enough so you've given it a go to see if you do enjoy it, if it does have the value, and probably at least, you know, I always say sort of 3 months, 90 days to try a strategy, let's say. And obviously podcast is really like the long game. But I love what you're saying that, you know, first of all, if things aren't working anyway, you know, it's very easy to say, oh my goodness, I've been doing these lives and I don't really want to keep doing them. If you've only had 1 or 2 people on them, to be honest, if you hate it, you know, your business isn't going to collapse. Obviously, it's harder to stop doing something that is working. But I've seen more and more people coming out and being really courageous and saying, you know what, I've just closed my program. It was hugely successful, but it was draining for me. And now I'm repositioning. And ultimately, I think that's a much more effective strategy. And, you know, it's your business and it's your life. So you don't owe the world anything. You don't have to, just because you 3 years ago decided to do a particular podcast or business model or whatever, you don't have to stick with that. So I think the most successful companies are the ones that have been able to pivot and evolve. And certainly when it's your own personal company in life, that's all the more important to make sure it's still meeting your goals.
And it may even blow up even more because you made that change. Someone just sent me a TED talk earlier that I watched where he was like, actually, the majority of people are very happy to do more things or do less of something, but very few people are happy to do something different. And it's often the people who chose to do something different who end up having way more success with it because they just went, why are we even doing it this way? Like someone's just decided that this is the way to do it. So now we all do it. But nobody knows why. No,
and the funny thing is, obviously, and especially when we're first starting out, it's natural. We need to kind of, it's not stealing, but kind of we're learning from and copying to some extent and feeling inspired. So again, the Instagram kind of example you see, and I've done this in the past too, you know, you see a certain type of post and you think, oh, wow, that must be working. So then you kind of replicate and suddenly everybody's doing the same kind of post and so on, right? And it's just, you're just drowning in the sea of everybody doing the same kind of stuff. You know, if you're just teaching the same stuff other people are teaching, if you're doing the same kind of, you might get a few more follows, but you're never going to be leading. You're never going to be different, right? And if we think, again, the big companies like, Kodak and Blockbuster, Nokia and so on, that obviously failed to kind of innovate. It's a little bit like that in a smaller scale, perhaps. But if I'm only regurgitating what other people have taught me, if I'm only copying what other people are doing, yeah, maybe I'll make a little bit of money in the short term, but I'm never going to be a leader. I'm never going to really make an impact. And I'm certainly not going to have a lot of fulfillment and meaning myself either.
I agree with that.
Would you love to be part of a community with other podcasters, business owners, entrepreneurs, and industry experts to brainstorm ideas or potential solutions to challenges that you're experiencing? Then why not come and join the Podcasting for Experts community on Facebook? We are a growing community of business owners and podcasters who want to continuously improve our skills and find new ways to use our podcasts to grow our businesses. And if that's what you want to, then come and join us at pristinepodcast.com/group. I really look forward to getting to know you and your show.
So we've got our objectives. We've got our business model. So we know that we're not going to try to sell our 100 people audience the $10 product to try and make 100,000 because it doesn't add up. So we figured out that probably with our smaller, potentially very engaged, but just smaller in size audience, we're going to focus on probably selling something more high-end, like coaching or a service that's done for you or done with you at least. Now, the aim of our content is to bring people within our general range, and then we're going to bring them towards our services. How do we make sure we actually bridge that gap? And who we're attracting is who we need to be attracting, because that's something that I found. I've attracted plenty of people. And then I was like, hang on, but these people, they're never going to want to buy my thing.
Well, so many, and that's a really important question to ask. I've had clients like that. I had a graphic designer who was doing lots of posts on how do you design your own logo and so on. And then we thought, hang on a second, you don't want to teach people how to design their own logo because you want them to pay you to work. If you're attracting people who want to do it themselves, who aren't going to pay, and they just want to sort of hodgepodge something together in Canva, that's obviously not the kind of client that you want for your high-end
It makes so much sense
professional
when you hear
design
it.
services. Yeah, it sounds obvious,
moment,
right? And yet so many of us do that.
Yes, 100%. Like right now,
Yeah.
we've only got a very low-end product to sell, just everything packaged in one place. So if you wanted to launch your podcast and you don't want to research all the pieces, then I put it all in one place for you. But, you can also listen to the podcast and just waste hours and hours and hours and piece it together by yourself. No problem. But I don't offer a done-for-you service. So for me, it's okay. But I've been there so many times, and we don't do any content on how to edit your podcast because we edit podcasts for people. We want you to come and get it done and not do it yourself. I don't want you to spend 6 hours a week editing your one podcast episode because, I'm super perfectionist and I can't edit my own podcast because I will sit there and I'll be like, I don't know, I'll be wasting all the hours getting it just right. So I don't offer that kind of content, but I used to back in the day. I used to teach people how to basically do what I want you to pay me for. And the first time somebody said, well, if you're teaching people how to do this all by themselves, why would they pay you? And I was like, oh, yeah.
And I think that's really the crux of it, isn't it? As we said, it seems so obvious. But what's important is also to have a longer time horizon. Because, maybe at the moment I'm offering these kind of cheaper services because I'm just starting out or whatever that is. But if you have a vision, and hopefully you do, of what success looks like for you and the kind of work you want to be doing and the level of money you want to be earning, it takes a long time for your content to work, right? So if you're proactively building a long-term brand, you want to be shooting a bit higher. The classic example within business coaching, if we take a sort of general example, if I am constantly saying, things like, how to start a business on no money, then what am I attracting? I'm attracting people who have no money. And that seems obvious, but that's, or if I'm writing lots of things about how to set up your Instagram, the absolute basics. Whereas if I'm elevating the messaging to, once you're in business, how do you then scale to, or if you have a thriving one-to-one, how do you then launch into group programs or, whatever that is, that's a different kind of messaging. And people will always aspire up. I've always seen, if someone talks about, hey, I work with 7-figure entrepreneurs, you're not just going to attract the 7-figure, you'll attract the people who aspire to that level. Whereas obviously if you're putting your messaging right at the bottom, you've got nowhere to go and you're just really getting the bare minimum. And as you said, really understanding again, who is that ideal client, who's got a problem that you can solve and who's willing and able to pay for it. I had a client who wanted to work with, high-powered, busy CEOs and so on, and all her content was very much, again, kind of join my Facebook group and do this challenge and so on, which like a busy senior CEO would never do that kind of thing, So you really need to have a thorough understanding of your client and the problems they face. Like a client at that level has very different types of problems than a solopreneur who's doing some freelancing alongside a full-time business, let's say. Someone who has already an organization and team and a 6-7 figure income has very different challenges. And that, I think, is the key to then developing the content to attract the right people.
I think that's very important. I think that's come up more than ever, because at the start I used to work very much with people who could just about afford like 200, 300 a month. And that was like max. And I was like, what? Where are all the people who are actually like, making it? And I'm like, oh, they're not spending all day hanging out in Facebook groups. I'm like, oh yeah, they don't have time for that. And now I think, other than for editing, I work on the marketing side with a couple of people, and they literally just have no time. And I did not understand how much of no time they really have. So yeah, everything becomes like, I'm just going to put out an ad, 10 people will send an application, we will trial 5 people, and whoever does the best job will get it, and the decision is made within 24 hours. So it's like a totally different way of working, and I hadn't appreciated that. So definitely, I can't say enough. If you don't know anyone that is at the level of the people who you want to be working with, I think finding someone through friends or referrals and talking to them is going to be so, so, so important, because they'll say so many small things where you're like, oh yeah, that didn't occur to me.
Probably you want to be asking yourself, why do I want to work with this if I don't have the understanding already, right? There must be a reason. And usually we work with somebody who maybe was us a few years ago, or we have some affinity, relatability and credibility with that audience. So arguably that might not be, I could say, hey, I want to work with 9-figure entrepreneurs. And it's not to say that I have to have earned 9 figures myself, but I'd feel a bit fraudulent if I don't understand and I don't have that experience myself and so on. And I think what you said is interesting there, that the channels you want to go to are different. So you just like playing around, as many people do in sort of free Facebook groups and so on, probably isn't the right thing. And as you've discovered, but it's not just the channels, it's also the messaging. And importantly, not just attracting the right people, but rejecting the wrong people. And that's huge. And I had, years ago, I wrote an article, one of my better blog posts, I guess, that got picked up by Arianna Huffington and Business Insider and all sorts. And I thought, this is it, I've made it. And I got thousands of people coming in, and like 100 people booked a call. And at the time, I just didn't have the understanding or system behind that. And most people were no-shows. The few people who did show up were just like wanting to chat and hear a bit about the story, and literally none bought from me.
Nice.
Because I had no filter. I had no understanding. Now I have a qualification procedure. Hopefully I've chatted with them before. They've seen my content. My ideal client would have already seen my workshops, read stuff. So they know who I am. They know what it costs. They want to work with me. It's just a question of sort of how. I'm not some sort of expert salesperson who can do this slick pitch and like convince you to work with me. I'd much rather they're already warm. But also having an application form, as you said, on the site where I can filter. If I ask, what have you tried so far? And they say nothing. What are you willing to invest? Nothing. Then, okay, no problem. Here's my free Facebook group. Here are my free podcast episodes. Let's get started there. But then I'm turning away the people who aren't the right fit because, of course, they're not ready to invest and so on. So rejecting people, which is hard when you're first starting out because you feel like you need to say yes to everybody because you're kind of desperate and keen for the money and the experience, but actually saying no to some people is just as important.
I think it's super important just from your own mindset perspective. I felt like a huge thing happened when I realized that there was just people who are not going to work. Like no matter how much money that person went to give me, it's just not going to work. And I think you always have to remember that there's also negative consequences when you take on people. They will pay you money. They will not be happy with the service that you're providing because they're really just not your people. So you're going to work twice the amount for, the same amount of money to try and make it right. And then they might still go and demand a refund from PayPal and then also talk badly about you. So it is not just the fact that if I say no, I would be letting 500 go. It will cost you money if you take someone on that is the wrong kind of person, and it can cost you a lot.
And that so-called wrong person is taking up time and attention away from all the other clients you could be helping, right? And as you say, that's just wasting your time, it's wasting their time. And yeah, you're not going to get the testimonials and so on. You're not going to be enjoying the work and so on. So absolutely, if we can filter and find the clients, and of course it takes some time. And if we're just starting out, we don't yet know which clients are going to be the best fit. But the more we can learn about that And it's a two-way process, right? In a way, we're interviewing them to see, can I help you? And if you're too early on or if you're too advanced for me, then I need to be able to say, actually, you know what, I'm not the right person for you. I'd recommend that you talk to someone else or first spend some time exploring whatever that is, because you're just not in a position right now. So yeah, it's hard, isn't it, to say no and to put those boundaries, but it's part of the process of learning and understanding, really understanding who can I really help, who will I most enjoy working with, who's going to pay me on time, who's going to really benefit, and then write a glowing testimonial and refer me to everybody and be an incredible ambassador because they're such a perfect fit for me that they'll love what I help them do and they'll evangelize about it, right? That's the kind of client we want to be working with.
That's super, super, super important. So how do you feel about the old advice of being sure that you were niched down as much as possible? I mean, I hear a lot about it from a content perspective as well. And I used to be a more generalized service provider, and I've definitely found it difficult to create content that attracts the right people because I literally worked with anyone that fell within my type of business owner criteria. And I offered pretty much anything tech related, and that was kind of complex. And one of those things used to be podcast editing that we used to offer. And that's how this became even a thing, because we loved it so much that we were like, why don't we stop doing all the other stuff and just do this one thing now after 5 years or something? But that was scary. I found it scary to pick one thing that we did, and we did it well, and it was easy and comfortable. But I found it scary to let go of everything else. But from a content perspective, I found it very helpful because it gave me a chance to stop talking about anything and everything to try and catch all the people doing all the things, which is how I felt before. Like, you know, that SpongeBob gif where he's doing all the housework at the same time. That was me trying to talk about all the things.
Yeah.
So that was a bit how I felt before. And now I feel better.
So that's so interesting. And that's a great example that you're sharing. It's super scary. And the truth is that when we're first starting out, as you found, you don't yet know what that one thing is. You haven't done it before, so you don't know that editing is the thing that you're going to love doing, that's going to make the biggest difference for your clients, that's going to resonate, and so on. So, you know, I mentioned my awful post that I started out. I was kind of just, you know, throwing spaghetti on the wall, as they say, and writing whatever I cared about. Ultimately, and I haven't said this yet, I think the model I developed in my corporate world, which is still so true now, is that you have that kind of sweet spot, the Venn diagram, if you remember those from school, with the circle of, this is my client, their wants, needs, desires, the questions they have, and the overlap with this is me and my brand and what I want. And that's where the sweet spot of the content is, right? That you're talking about things that you're passionate about that make a difference, but also that this client wants. I can't just sit here and talk about what I fancy talking about if I actually want to build a business with a particular kind of client. But likewise, as we said, I'm not just going to go out there and answer random questions, because then I'm not really building the business I want to build. So I guess on the niching topic, the eternal question, when you're first starting out, I think it's so hard to know how to get that specific. And yeah, exactly as you said, and I have to hold my hand up again, I'm quite a generalist. It's kind of my personality. You know, there are the multi-passionate, multi-potential, Renaissance, right? Whatever we want to talk about. So we need to find a way for that to work so that we don't get bored and so on. But the truth is, the more repetitive we can be and consistent with the messaging, the more we're going to become the go-to person, company to solve a particular problem, to attract a certain thing. And there's always that fear, again, oh my gosh, if I say I only work with women, then I won't be able to earn enough money. And what if a man comes and so on? You can still say, if a man comes to you, you know, I also work with men, which happened to me when I was trying to, you know, play around with a little bit more the female focus. That didn't happen at all. People might still come to you and say, hey, do you also do this? And so on, you're welcome to work with them. The truth is, you're not going to turn people off, actually. But as you said, if you speak to everybody, you speak to nobody. And it's so much easier if you can be super, super focused. This is exactly who I'm focusing on. And it's very unlikely that you'll niche too much. It's very rare that you're going to be too specific, right? Most of us err on the side of being too general. So I do think that if we can lean into being more specific, and again, just it's not for life, just say the next 3 months, I'm going to focus on this message or on this particular client. And either that's hugely successful or it doesn't work. And then you can try another kind of demographic or another focus area the next 3 months, let's say. But if I'm one day talking about, as you said, podcast editing, and the next day I'm talking about, I don't know, social media graphics, and then another day I'm talking about YouTube videos, you know, it's a bit like, hang on a second. And the classic example I always think of, I don't know, like a web agency. If I'm a dentist and I see a web agency that works with, you know, any old business, why would I go with that? There's so many web design agencies now. Whereas if there's a web design agency that works specifically with dentists, they clearly really understand my business and the needs and the setup and the so on. And I would go, the other example is, if you have a brain tumor or something, would you go to like a general practitioner, or would you go to a neurosurgeon who can actually help you with that specific thing? And that's, I think, given that there's such a proliferation of content, and so, if you're just helping people with their businesses or doing design, then it's so hard to stand out. So 100%, it's easier if you can be more specific. And again, it's not for life, but at least for now, give it a go. But I say that knowing that I'm quite a generalist. Again, I'm quite sort of end to end with my services. I help with a lot of different aspects of business, but still within that, I try to be super specific with the type of people I work with, the type of solutions and problems and so on. But I recognize that it's not as easy as we're making it sound, but it's certainly the direction in which we want to go to become known, because the big names of people, if you're Oprah or Tony Robbins, you can help people with anything because you're so famous and you have a team of thousands
people
of people.
Already know your name
people
anyways.
Will come to you anyway. And if it's funny because I do training on personal branding, let's say, and if you look at their kind of elevator pitch, their headline and their websites, they're so generic. Even someone like Mary Ford, it's like, I help people live their most fulfilling lives. If a client said that to me, I'd say that it's so generic, that's not going to attract anyone. But if you're at that incredible successful level already, then that's fine because you have the content and the experience and the money to back that up. But I think when you're starting out, again, you need to have a little bit more specificity to who you're helping and with what problem and so on.
Funnily enough, I was just listening to the last episode on Dupe that was about critical thinking, and they had mentioned checking sales pages and sales page promises very clearly because they had mentioned the fluff of like, I help you to lead your best life. And I was like, well, how can you do that? Like, is whatever they're promising within your control or within their control? And if it's not within their control, then they shouldn't be promising that the course is going to deliver that for everybody because it probably won't. And that's where the specific aspect kind of comes in very handy as well. So when people know what they're going to get out of working with you, that's when they end up signing up because they know exactly what they're going to get. It's no guessing. Like, I'm going to give you money and in return, you're going to give me X. And that makes it way easier. And even within just podcasting and podcast editing, even there, it gets so distinct that it hadn't even occurred to me that there'll be people reaching out to me with problems that don't relate to business owners because I'm so in the business owner sphere that I was like, oh, now I have these people messaging me and they're doing this for fun. And I'm like, why would you be putting in all these hours for fun? And then I'm like, oh, they just like it. I'm like, oh, yeah, right. But I was so focused on that one group of people in my head that I hadn't realized that actually there's a huge range of reasons why people do what they do and the types of shows that they're creating that goes beyond what I even have in my mind. And I'm like, right, I need to get way more specific in my content. Like, I need to get way more specific with the things that I am specifically talking about and who it is for. And it helps. Like, it is scary, and it was way scarier back in the day than it is now, but it's doing you so many more favors because otherwise you're going to keep having to explain yourself. And you get all these emails from people who are like, can you help me with that or not? And whenever someone emails that, I always feel like I should have done a better job communicating this ahead of time through my content, through the things that I'm talking about, through the topics that I'm choosing to cover. Because if I did, then it should be obvious that this is not something they should ask me about because I don't talk about that ever.
And that's a great kind of thermometer, as it were, of where you are with your messaging. If now I do feel like people come to me, I don't think ever I say, no, I can't help you with that because they're coming, it's so clear what I'm doing, even though it's broad to some extent, it's always, no, absolutely. And this is how I've helped another client do this and I have this, and so on, right? So absolutely, if you are getting people asking you to do things that don't feel like what you should be doing, then you need to ask yourself exactly that. What am I writing on my website? What content am I putting out? And how can I, again, speaking of how to reject that type of client, what content could I put out that would make it clear that that's not the right, I'm not the right person for them. So that's really important as well. But it is, in that case, it is thinking about the content we're putting out, again, getting really specific about that, isn't it? To make sure that's serving the purpose it's supposed to be serving. And the more specific you are with the client, of course, the more, if I'm just putting out general, and again, I see people putting out general inspirational quotes about goals and things, and okay, but what's the point there? Is if you're saying I am helping this type of client with this type of problem and this life circumstance with this specific goal that they're going to set, then that makes it so much easier to resonate with them, makes it so much easier for you to create content, podcast episodes, Instagram graphics, whatever, right? Because you're speaking to a really specific
Yeah,
audience.
like try to talk to 3 different audiences at the same time and then say something meaningful in one sentence. Like you literally cannot, because you have to go, well,
you elevate it to such a high level that exactly. And then yeah.
Ooh, like you can't. Like I don't know how I used to talk about all the platforms and all the things to all the people and still got any money at the end of the day and not drive myself crazy in the process. Like I legit don't know. Like even now that we have a way smaller group, I'm like, I have to remind myself to get even more specific than that. So it's a total learning process still. And whenever you start something new, and particularly when you're multi-passionate, there's more than one thing that I do. So in each of those, it's a learning process, And I don't think it ever stops.
It can feel, unfortunately, no, that's it. And again, we should be kind to ourselves because it's normal, but it can get boring. We feel like, oh my gosh, I've said this 100 times. I've been saying this for 5-6 years. And I guess to some extent I've evolved, and maybe then my business should as well. But as long as we're still committed to helping someone who is where we were before, then it's important. They haven't heard that message before. Like for them, in my case, it's a massive step to, let's say, quit their job and start a business. So that needs to be a message that's still there. And I was always reluctant to talk openly about quitting your job. And then I thought, but that's ridiculous, because if I'm always kind of tiptoeing around this topic, then, there's certainly enough people in the world who want to quit their job and start a business for me to have a viable business helping them, right? Yes, there are some people who want to stay in their jobs who love their job, but that's fine. Then obviously they're not the right people for me, and good luck to them. So if you're trying always, oh no, but what if somebody also, maybe they don't want to do a podcast, maybe they want to do, and then I'll help them as well. That just becomes very generic and meaningless. You can't possibly give them, proper teaching, inspiration, or sell them a program if you're trying to cover all these bases for anybody with any kind of challenge. It becomes a bit crazy. But again, let's be kind to ourselves, because it's when you're so deep in your business, it's so hard to see it as clear cut as when we look at other people's businesses, which is why, of course, having a business coach or whatever can really help that.
Yeah, because it's someone that's not so attached to it as well. So it's just someone that has like a step back that can say, hang on a second. And you're like, oh yeah, I was thinking about this for 3 months, couldn't figure out why that was. And then one person just says it in like 3 words, and I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to take my things and go think about that one more time, and then I'll come back with a better idea than that. So that's normal though. And I think everyone has literally been in that place more than once, like at least me personally.
Definitely. And of course, just one more thing to think about, I guess, is the stage of the buying process they're at. Because another mistake I've certainly done is just have all this sort of inspirational quotes people do and the kind of big picture awareness stuff. At the other end of the spectrum, if you're only doing sales posts, obviously that's kind of buy. That doesn't work either. So it's always a mix of, there's the kind of know, like, trust that I'm sure people have heard of, that people need to first know that you exist and understand, in my case, my big picture message of you need to define what success means for you. And there's this idea of escaping the 9 to 5. And there's kind of big philosophy of that, creating more freedom, flexibility, fulfillment. Then there's more of the kind of connecting with people and engaging a bit richer content and so on, right? Then there's the teaching, and this is my framework and this is my process and the how-to. And then there's the actual selling of, hey, this is how you can work with me and so on, right? And there's no, unfortunately, magical thing of like 20% of this type of content, 10% of that. But if it's all just my personal stories, then I'm probably not going to sell anything. If I'm only selling, then people don't know who I am and they don't care and so on. If I'm only talking like, hey, I'm inspiring you to live your better life, then again, that's not really connecting. So it is a bit of that mix of attracting people to the big picture message, sharing your personal story, and also at some point you have to tell people, hey, this is how you work with me, this is how you pay me. That's a part of the puzzle that a lot of us forget sometimes, I think. We're just so eager to help and talk about incredible content that we're all giving out and so on. But ultimately, this is a business, and our audience needs to be kind of used to us selling to them as well. If we're too sort of tentatively tiptoeing around, oh, I don't want to be too salesy, then probably we're erring on the side of not being clear enough about what we offer. And you might think that you're, oh my gosh, I've promoted this like 300 times. And then inevitably you get someone who says, oh, I didn't know that you were a podcast editor. It's like, what? I've emailed 300 times. It's all I've been talking about. But people are busy and they don't care. So, unless they happen to be at that one moment of right now, they want to be buying, that they're in the market for that particular service. Most people aren't going to notice. So again, we need to kind of err on the side of being too salesy probably, because most of us are not going to be clear enough.
Yeah, I had a whole chat with Sandra about that when it comes to email marketing as well. So we talked about the precisely same thing of like, you do need to be telling people about what you're offering, because otherwise they can't buy your stuff because they don't know what it is that you do. So that's sort of a problem. So very important
And
step.
by the way, people might unsubscribe because, I can't believe they're selling, but this is a business, right? So if they're never going to buy from you, then probably they're just wasting space on your list, to be fair. And of
you're
course,
paying
again,
for them.
we really would love to help people. Funnily enough, now around Christmas, I've had a few messages, I've been following you for years, and I just don't think they will ever buy from me, but they're still finding value in it. By all means, you're welcome to stay there. But, it's just, I think we need to be a bit less sensitive, I guess, and not take it personally as well. If someone, let's say, unsubscribes or whatever, there are some trolls and so on. I think I've been lucky. I haven't had that many awful messages. I had someone say something about they couldn't listen to my message on Instagram because I had so many wrinkles on my forehead. So that was a nice one to get. But apart from that, I think most people, either will listen and find it inspirational and work with you, or hey, not, and that's fine too.
I'm just putting my head on my hand for a minute just because of it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It was. I thought like, wow, I've really made it now. I've got a troll who's picking on my appearance. I feel like I'm really sort of tapping into some kind of societal thing going on here. But it's like, okay.
Yeah. I shared my loveliest comment was this man. I shared a video on moving to Albania, not to do with this, but on my YouTube channel. And I had this very hateful man who didn't like that I had just a couple of things to say that weren't that amazing about his country. So he took it very personal and he went on a very ranty YouTube comment. So I was like, oh, he's having a bad day, right? I'm like, I'm just going to block that because he wasn't being very nice. So I was like, yeah, thanks. I was like, haters going to hate. Or like, there's got to be someone.
Well, that's it. And I literally cannot understand how people have the time. Like, I see people comment on ad. If I see an ad that's really stupid, I just ignore it. If I see a post, I don't have time in my life. And often, the criticism that comes is from people who, let's be honest, don't matter. They have obviously too much time on their hands to sit there and troll you and so on. However, I would say that we need to be aware that there will be an element of that and not be afraid of putting ourselves out there. Another book I read, of course, Brene Brown with vulnerability and so on. And she was talking about, how when she initially did her TED talk, it was a small audience and then it was put on the front page of TED and it just exploded. She was like, oh my God, people are going to see. And ultimately, it's sort of a fear of success because I'm desperate for more people to see my message. I want the PR coverage. I want more clients, but it's also super scary because, of course, when that happens, more vocal criticism is going to come and people will comment on my wrinkles and they will say, oh, you're such a privileged whatever to be talking about whatever. Like that criticism will come and that's scary. So we need to sort of be prepared for that and not take it personally and understand that that is unfortunately a part of success. And you do see actually celebrities and big name people talking about that. You know what, like, and those kind of, what are they called? The tweet troll things, whatever, the funny YouTube videos. Because if you read that and take it to heart, it's devastating because of course these hugely successful, beautiful, popular people also get their fair share of criticism and trolling and so on, and yet they just have to kind of turn it off and focus on, again, making that impact you want to make and telling your story and so on. But it's just to be aware that let's try not to be too afraid of that, to still voice our message and to make that contribution, being aware that unfortunately the more successful we are, the more people see it, the more likely there is to be a debate and criticism as well, which hopefully, if it's valuable criticism, will help us with that feedback and we can evolve and improve our message and so on, right? But of course, the ones that are not so valid are just maybe turn off, block and ignore.
Yeah, just shelve it, Oh my goodness. Can't believe that we've already talked for as long as we've talked. So...
Could keep going.
I know, right? But I've had that with everybody, and I feel like I could have put out 2-hour podcast episodes as well because, I don't know, you will just never get to the bottom of it.
And by the way, again, I mean, not to extend the conversation even further, but there are podcasts, there are 2, 3, 4 hours long. I use those to sort of fall asleep in the evening. There are others. Mine is, 15 minutes each episode. And both for you as the content creator and the listener, both exist, right? People often in Facebook groups ask, oh, what's the right length for a podcast episode? And there is no right length. If I'm talking to a busy mum or a commuter who has 20 minutes on the way to work to listen, then, a quick 15, 20-minute episode is perfect. If I'm talking to someone who's retired and passionate about Star Wars, then my Star Wars episode can be 5 hours, whatever it is, right? So again, it's just making sure it works for you, for your customer, for your clients, and there is no right answer, I guess, is the ultimate conclusion.
Yeah, that's the ultimate conclusion for pretty much everything to do with podcasting. I've had like a million content items now where I'm like, well, really there isn't a right answer, but there's whatever works. So like, let's do whatever works. So first off, before I get to the question that I've asked everybody that I really find the answer so interesting to, can you tell us more about where people can find out more about you and where they can best connect with you? Where can they get your best content?
Well, of course, everywhere. But given that we're on this podcast and talking podcasting, I think the best place is to go to Reimagining Success, my podcast. So hopefully we'll get a few more downloads there, won't we? And there's all the information there you need. Loads, 3 years worth, as I said, of content on redefining success, from the big picture down to more concrete tips on the things we've talked about: business model, content strategy, and of course information about everything else, Facebook group and website and so on. So Reimagining Success on your favorite podcast app, hopefully, is the best place to find me.
Cool. I will put the links to that in the show notes, like I always do, so that everyone can find it very easily. And there's something that I've asked everybody, because I find in the last 6 years, I've met so many interesting people, and there's always something someone said to me somewhere at some point that really stuck with me. So I've been asking everybody if they've had an interaction or something someone said to them, or something that they've read in a book or heard in a video that's kind of really resonated with them and sort of almost become like a bit of a mantra that they keep coming back to. Is there anything like that that's stuck with you?
I love that question, and to be honest, and it's a bad answer, there's so much, of course, because you internalize these things, and I have such a voracious appetite for learning, and I've worked with different coaches and listened to gazillion podcast episodes and so on, almost too much. The one thing that comes to mind, and it's not sort of a catchy, pithy phrase, but one of the first business coaches I worked with, she was incredible. She, I think, was sort of undervalued in a way. She wasn't a big name. I just thought she was amazing, and she was creating all this stuff behind the scenes. Again, they were talking about, showing up consistently. And her message for me, in fact, was, be consistent. At the time, I think I wasn't really treating my business like a business. So she helped me, really simple things like actually show up in my Facebook group, send a weekly email and so on. But it's more in how her business has evolved, because she always said, do the work, over deliver, be incredible what you do. And there will be kind of a tipping point when you kind of explode. Again, that kind of exponential success I was talking about with Dory Clark. And since then, I stopped working with her, she has just exploded. And she's become, one of she's hobnobbing with those bigger names that we before kind of looked up to. And she's got a team of 40 people, and she's got the millions of followers and listeners and in the top podcasts and so on. And speaking of what success looks like for you, that's not what I aspire to, actually. And I say that honestly, because I have 2 young kids and I have a certain model that I'm aspiring to. And I don't want a team of 40, 50 people. That's not the business model I'm after. But I find it incredibly inspiring, because she was just showing up consistently. She's been sharing recently exactly that. It was like 10, 15 years ago she did her podcast. She's been doing episode after episode. And hey, it's paying out. So apologies, it's not kind of a pithy little meme that you can put, but it's really about doing the work even when you're not seeing the results yet. It's not to say blindly just, doing it and you're not seeing any results and doing the same thing for 10 years and then suddenly realizing you have no money in a failed business. That's not what I'm saying. However, there's a lot of putting your ego to one side, trusting, there's a bit of faith, of believing that things are going to work out. And again, as we started the conversation with, delivering for the small number of clients maybe that you have now, doing an incredible job for them, continuing to learn yourself and grow and show up and adding value, and you will succeed. You are going to get to where you want to be. It's just a question of when rather than if.
Bam. And that,
boom, mic drop.
And that's where we'll totally, I was going to say like mic drop, and then we'll just switch it up. Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this week. I think it's been super helpful to look at content from a more business intentional direction. And I think there's going to be lots of things for people to think about a little bit. Sometimes I have to listen to something and then go away and collect my thoughts. And so thanks for that.
Yeah, and we've asked some big picture questions, and maybe, I'm not sure how you're positioning this episode, but maybe people are expecting some more kind of specifics around content. But I think it's so easy to find all of those tips on, you should post this many times a week, and these are the top, and so on. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking, as you said, what's success for you? What's the business model? How can you create content that's going to support that model? So hopefully some sort of insights and questions to ask yourself that maybe you haven't thought about before.
I think so.
That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you. If you are looking for a community where you can brainstorm with like-minded podcasters and business owners, then don't forget to check out our Facebook group. You can find it at pristinepodcast.com/group. The link is also in the show notes.